2.2 3712D of the Code of Virginia, it is necessary for the board to certify that since the Fairfax County School Board convened a closed meeting on July 15th, 2019, to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirements and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the board during the closed meeting. Do I have a motion? Motion made by Ms. Hines, seconded by Ms. Palchik. All those in favor? And that is unanimous with a number of our board members not here yet, but that passes. So, Ms. Derenak-Kofax, if you would like to go ahead and start this portion of the work session, that would be great.
Thank you. We had a presentation at our regular board meeting on Thursday night, and Ms. Burden, you have not spoken, so I assume you're going to have the opportunity to go back over it a little bit, because there were not many questions that night for you, and I know we have some. And so this is fiscal year 2019 year end, which we're talking about.
Okay. We just went ahead and put the school operating fund statement summary and balance available. That's part of the agenda item up on the screen. So, I mean, I can summarize like I did Thursday night, but I understand that time is an issue. So if you want to just go over this summary, the first item is the fiscal 20 beginning balance of $25.5 million. That was set aside in fiscal 18, and so that is a carryover requirement as far as the beginning balance for fiscal 20. The flexibility reserve of $8 million, that's always funded at year end. The fuel contingency at $2 million, that also is a routine adjustment at every year end. The centralized instructional resources reserve refers to the textbook fund at $3.75. And then the commitments and carryover, the outstanding encumbered obligations are $27.2 million, and that's basically purchase orders, undelivered orders, those sorts of things. And it primarily is technology and facilities items. I think about 70% of the purchase orders that are carried forward are in those two departments. We have the schools and the projects carryover, which is the 25% that the schools can carry over as part of, again, a routine adjustment. And then the projects carryover is for multi-year projects. That's about $17 million of the 26.4. And then department critical needs carryover is 6.5. For the total of those routine carryover amounts from fiscal 19, leaving a balance after those commitments at $35 million. Then we also have items that have been identified as part of the fiscal 20 approved budget. The CIS salary scale restoration, recall that's the small amount of the 1/3 of moving the CIS scale to 50% of the BA scale as a 3-year phase in. It was $2.7 million in fiscal 22 million was funded out of the school board staffing initiative funds when the budget was adopted, and 0.7 was slated to come out of year end as well. The restraint and seclusion professional development, again, an amendment that was made at the end of fiscal 20 or fiscal 20 adoption for about 0.3 million. And then intranet accessibility at $450,000. That too was an amendment that we reduced the fiscal 20 budget and said that we would fund with year end if funds were available. We also have major maintenance of $3.6 million. I think I explained on Thursday night that historically we've budgeted $10 million for major maintenance, but in fiscal 14, due to budget cuts, we reduced that $10 million by 3.6, so we budget $6.4 million with plans that every year we would allocate $3.6 million of year-end funds to bring that back up to $10 million, and we have done that every year since that action was taken. So that's what that represents. And then strategic plan investments. The equity plan for discipline policies and practices is about $600,000. That funds 7 substance abuse specialists at 219-day contracts, And then we have a couple $100,000 for an online discipline tool. I just heard from Ms. Lefglass that they just got the quotes in for that. And actually, the tool is the one that Arlington Public Schools uses for their discipline referral. So that just came in a couple hours ago, that information. The trades for tomorrow of $200,000, that's startup funds. I think the original request was for $700,000, and the $200,000 is for one position and some hourly funds to be able to get that initiative started. Staffing contingency, this is a repeat of what we requested at third quarter, and I think the board deferred that until year end. We have used the majority of the staffing reserve for enrollment and other needs. As of today, we still have, the take-back part of the process. So when we look at, the best enrollment information we have, which largely comes from the principals, at this point, and so late July and August, we'll start looking at enrollment and what we actually think it's going to be. But of course, after the first of the school year, we don't take back positions anymore, even if enrollment doesn't come in, because that'd be very disruptive. So we've, again, identified $3.3 million of year-end to go into the staffing reserve to give us some additional positions there. Title IX softball fields, again, that's Annandale and Justice Parks. We're going in halves with the county on that at about $400,000. The Edison STEM Lab, this is the science lab portion of that with a 2-year phase-in, and the classroom portion being in the second year of fiscal 21. And then that leaves 24.9 as a set-aside for the fiscal 21 beginning balance, so that it all nets to zero. If there are any questions.
All right, I first have on my list Mr. McElveen, followed by Ms. McLaughlin.
Okay, so I'm going to begin with the issue that was you raised last, which was the Edison STEM Labs. And my very bleak understanding of this is that there were materials that were kind of stored away, and for some reason that they were never put into full use, and I don't know the time period for that. And of course, I support moving forward for this, but I want to know is there a potential that other schools have had a similar situation occur where, we haven't made use of things that have been donated to us?
I ask my instructional people to address that.
So no, not to my knowledge. The issue with the Edison STEM Lab is that we have a 3-year integrated math, science, and technology program that the students are participating in. And as that program has grown since its inception now in its 4th year, we need the additional lab space based on the additional types of project work and lab work that the students are doing. So we needed to create that additional lab space, and we haven't been able to strategically budget for that. And as a result, some of the things that would be hands-on lab experiments that we would want students to do, they haven't had the ability to access those that we would really, choose to have. So this is taking that first step to expand that particular lab space experience for students just at Edison.
And Sloan and Ryan, this may help you. And Sloan, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't remember everything, and I'm sometimes wrong. This was innovating with the state for high school innovation. We got the grants, exciting for Edison. We're doing a lot of the soft work with the instruction, the materials, but we didn't put in the facility adjustments to take this lab to its full potential. And when I got here last year, I heard that this was a long promised thing that we would do. It was never done. And this is just really closing a loop on something we should have done from the beginning, which was to have the curriculum materials in place, the instruction in place, but the facilities modifications to make it happen. So we're closing a loop on something that we partnered with the state several years ago to do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate timing because the school was just renovated a few years ago. So can you just tell me the specifics of what this will include? You mentioned a classroom in a later year, but what is the next 2 phases, the facilities piece?
Well, the second phase is $200,000, and that's the classroom area. But as far as details, is Mr. Plattenberg?
And we can get Mr. Plattenberg, but a major portion is to ensure that we have the correct lab space in place for students. And so it's merely the materials that you would need in the lab spaces for students, nothing additional. Mr. Plattenberg is here, and he can specify a little bit more clearly in terms of what we're going to be putting into those lab spaces.
The lab spaces themselves really actually had a number of different components to it, where you had the element of where the actual instruction was taking place, and then the actual application. So, and in between, you had an observation. It required a lot of the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing upgrades that were going to occur, and we were going to be doing this in a series of phases. So that was the intent of this item.
Oh, okay. I was just asking for more specifics on it.
I can give you an actual design layout if you wish.
Okay, that'd be great, yeah.
That will
because
show
I
you
would-
the layout of the space, the
Yeah.
schematic anyway.
Right, because if this is something that's supposed to be innovative, is this something we should be applying to all of our schools as we look to the future, right?
So the intent, yes, Mr. McElveen, what you're asking about, I will share the space. It really comes down to flexible space for the application. The innovation component comes back with the whole delivery of this, and that's why we want to go ahead and explore, because it has the potential to be something that we should be adopting and replicating across the division. Because of the costs associated with it, I'm really pleased that the Department of Instructional Services, through the Grants Office, got this partnership to go ahead so we can actually see it in application, even though we have a contribution, this component that we're discussing, so that if we need to go ahead and inculcate that into our educational specifications, we'll have a much better understanding going forward. And of course, it would be less costly if we did it as part of our original renovative design.
And I do know that we've provided the board some updates in the past about the Edison program, so we can certainly provide some updates to the board that we've shared in the past about the program at Edison and how it's a unique program that we're partnering with several partners on this.
Great, okay, thank you all. Yeah, and I think it would be wonderful if we could all have an opportunity to tour the facility after it's completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McElveen. Ms. McLaughlin, followed by Ms. Schultz.
Thank you. I'm trying to follow this document, and I'm a little concerned and just want to kind of point out just administratively, we've got to maybe try and do something to fix this because there's not even numbers on the page, so unfortunately I can't help anybody and tell you where to look, but, okay,
Top left.
so there you go. All right, so on page 9 of the document, so it starts to walk you through, some of this, what some of these things are here. But then if you go back to page 3, and the way, and it's more a matter of how things are numbered and titled so that you can kind of follow where things are. So top of page 3, section A, beginning balance, you'll see 8 different things listed out. It says department critical needs, carryover 6.5 million. Number 8, strategic investments 5.2 million. So then where am I finding after that what's falling into those categories? I mean, I can see where it's saying the strategic investments, and so some of those things are there. So is that,
These items are routine items that are every year. The reserves that we fund with year-end, as well as undelivered orders, the 25% that the schools can carry over, department carryover, multi-year projects, all of those sorts of things are routine that happen every year. So when you look at page 9, that number that you see, 33.7 million, that is, or I'm sorry, the 35 million, that is excluding all of those things that we are already taking out, because they're automatically carried forward into fiscal '20.
No, I appreciate that, but the reason why I'm bringing this up again is, so if referencing on page 3, where, again, it says department critical needs carryover 6.5 million. So then for the board, when we're trying to decide what we do with year end, I can't find where this 6.5 million is to figure out if I can support what we have. 35 million essentially in carryover. We're going to pull out about 10 million when I add up these numbers, leaving us with about 24.8 million to go into the 21 carryover, or the beginning balance set aside, not carryover, but it's set aside. My point being that I'm just trying to, if it's the 6.5 and the 5.2, I just think there needs to be better alignment. It shouldn't be that someone's reading from page 3 to page 9 and they don't know that you can't find one number to then find the other number. So as a result, why this is relevant to my colleagues is I have been hearing for the last 8 years that even though the board of supervisors have $500,000 for each of their 9 magisterial districts to staff and do the work to represent their districts, school board members have half of an administrative secretary or administrative aide to help us do our work. And, well, so the reality is that this was something we talked about 8 years ago, and the expectation of the public continues to get greater, and we're not being able to do the work to serve our constituents at the degree that the board of supervisors are by a long shot. So, and yet when I'm trying to look at how we're spending our money, because I'm trying to be mindful of where our greatest needs and priorities are, I'm looking at 2 different numbers where one's 6.5 million, and so I'm kind of thinking about us as a family, and I don't want to go ask for something that we can't afford to do. I'm struggling as a board member that in terms of wants and needs, we're reaching a point of critical need that the school board members, we can't keep up with our emails, our requests for meetings, our analysis, our ability to serve the community, and I wouldn't even know where to find it in here to figure out what's reasonable. So that's the first piece. And the second one is that I do want to know where in here in the year-end balance is it capturing up from our requests at the May budget vote on things like money set aside for an ombudsman for employees, the 3 speech and language pathology positions, and then, like I said, my third ask was going to be, is it reasonable to look at putting into a reserve or earmarking within a reserve potentially up to 6 positions for the school board office, so that not this board, but the next board being elected and coming in is going to be able to start having this conversation about whether or not they're going to have the supports they need and in what manner, whether it's analysts, whether it's having people who can just continue to better serve Fairfax County families with what we've got right now. So anything that can shed light on those first 2 things that I know we talked about as follow-on motions and for the budget, but I don't see them captured here.
Okay, well,
Because I thought that part of it was we were going to be doing stuff with year-end money to address this.
there's so many questions there, I just don't know where to start. But the department of 6.5 million, we can give you any number of detail for that. Facilities and transportation, it's about 1.5 million of that, and that's for lead testing, work orders, a field trip application. They're items that he is carrying over funds that he had budgeted in fiscal 19 to be able to do in fiscal 20. HR has about $1 million in classification studies type initiatives that they did not get completed in fiscal 19, and we can give you any level of detail that you'd like about the 6.5 million. As far as the 3 pathologists go, as I said Thursday night, that was a mistake in the budget. There should have been 3 speech pathologists budgeted for fiscal 20 that were not, and we plan on funding those out of the staffing reserve if that is approved that's been proposed, that was proposed Thursday night, and that you all take action on the 25th. And the ombudsman, what was that again?
An ombudsman position for employees, it was my understanding that we were putting money aside so that Francisco and Armando Perry would be able to look and see how you can incorporate that. So, because of what I said to Dr. Brabrand at the time and my colleagues is, I don't want to go another academic school year without having something to better serve our employees. But I knew we had to first look at how to incorporate that.
Let me say one thing before Dr. Duran
Lachlan, I'll
answers.
put you on for a go back. It sounds like you're going to need a go back, because we're done.
Ms. Kovacs, I appreciate about the need for the go back. I've asked my questions. It's a matter of them getting answered.
We can answer that real quick, though. The follow-on identifies that ombudsman for FCPS employees should be included in the fiscal '21 budget. And we're reading right off of board docs. That may have not been in your intention, but fiscal '21 is the language that was used in the motion.
And connected to that, based upon that discussion, Armando and I are meeting with HR to see how we might begin to think about his office currently providing that service this upcoming school year without the additional position, given now that there is an additional position to serve special education. So how that might, and that was a big part of what his current service is right now. So we are in the process of meeting, and I believe the follow-on asked us to come back by December with the plan. So we are having those conversations, but I don't think the intent was for this next budget to have a position perhaps the following year, based upon what we read in the follow-on motion.
The last thing I just want to say on this, we're working very hard in partnership with this board to provide the financial information in the way that the board wants to see it, so we can make decisions. And I do understand the point about trying to close the loop on things that the board has discussed, to be able to highlight where are those in these documents, and so we can take that feedback. The other thing is, I want to say this now, 2 years being here. I've shared with board leadership 2 times each year, and I want to say it to the whole board now. In partnership, I am not going to stand in the way of this board wanting additional supports for the board to do its work. That's a decision the board needs to make and direct me as superintendent, unless I'm directed to provide to you what I think your structure should be. And I, just after 2 years of being with you, don't think that's what you're looking for. But if you have a structure or supports that you recommend and you want in the budget, you all need to have that conversation and let me know. I am not going to stand in the way of it. If you have an opinion, if you want my opinion, I'll give it to you. But I certainly understand. I shared a half of an executive assistant when I was a cluster assistant superintendent, and it was impossible. So I don't know how you do it with a third.
You also had another director with you.
Right. I'm reaffirming your point that if you all want and believe that you need additional resources to do your job as board members, let's partner together and let me know what those things are so that our folks in finance can roll that into a future budget. We'll be glad to work with you on that.
That's fine, but to the question I asked about the 6.5 million, I'll just point out that if you look at like pages 5 and 6, they really give you details to something as small as $200,000, like the online discipline tool. But we don't have the breakout of how we're going to spend 6.5 million. So that's absolutely an essential next step. I'm just going to say to my colleagues, we've got to figure out what that 6.5 million is and whether or not you think that there's a little bit out of that 6.5 that we can do a set aside for positions to help next year's board.
Ms. Schultz, followed by Ms. Hines.
So I'm going to share, and I'm pretty familiar with this document. We've seen this document in this format before. I will say I don't think it does a service, so it's not on you. It's that it's a struggle. If we could go back to the page above, I believe it's page 4, the top of page 4. One page up. One page up. Okay. Not my beginning page. All right. That's the struggle. I'm sorry, one more page up. So the struggle I have with those two numbers in bold, if I'm reading this correctly, at year end, we're at 80.2 million, rolling over into beginning balance. You want to take 24.89 million and set that aside for next year's rollover for the beginning balance. So the difference is, I don't know if I don't know what those numbers, I haven't calculated those numbers. I'm assuming all of those are the 80.2 million. Just the detail. Right, yeah, that's part of it, is that it's not intuitive. So the numbers below 1 through 8 total the 80.2 million. So we did not spend this year, which I don't understand, number one, in particular, because I believe that we have to reset the flexibility reserve that we bought down. So I don't know where that is. My question is, what didn't get done? If our carryover is typically about $24-25 million, what $55 million worth of stuff did not get done this year? I don't get that. And particular, I get the first two, maybe even the first three. When I get to encumbered obligations, this is a perennial question that largely has to do with the thing that got presented to us during the audit the other night, which are sole source contracts and things that get carried over, encumbering us on sole source contracts, and why that number isn't going down, why we aren't mitigating the sole source contracts. And then I believe that we need to see greater detail when we have $55 million that is sitting there. If there's school projects carryover, what didn't get done or what is underway, $5.5 million almost in strategic investments. What strategic investments, and when are those in the pipeline to be committed? So can you talk a little bit to that?
I can. The school board flexibility reserve is $8 million, and of that, $2.6 million was allocated to the legal department, and $0.6 to movable walls. So of that $8 million, 3.2 was spent, and so 4.8 was unspent. This document carries over the 4.8 and brings that back up to 8 million with just general unspent funds, so that you always start the year with 8 million in the school board flexibility reserve.
But where does that money come from?
It comes from general carryover, funds that just aren't spent.
I don't know if anybody else is having trouble following this. My question is that general funds, so I'm listing 8 categories of funds. Now, school board flexibility is at 8.
This is for fiscal 20.
I understand that, but you had to take 4 from someplace else in order to make that 8. Where did that 4 come from?
A variety of places. I mean, it's just funds. I mean, when you have a $3 billion budget, well, even much smaller budgets, you are always going to have funds that are unspent at the end of the year. And those funds collectively equal an amount that has been by priority.
Ms. Schultz, I'm going to put you on for a go back. We have talked about the 3 minutes, and so I'll put you on for a go back. Ms. Hines, followed by Ms. Evans.
My question's been answered, thank you.
All right. That's wonderful. Ms. Evans, followed by Ms. Palchik.
Thank you very much. I wanted to mention that I am working on a potential amendment. This won't come as hopefully a surprise to anybody. In the fiscal year 21 budget, we've tasked the superintendent with developing a plan for equity in extracurricular activities. I thank you for answering my budget question about middle school, after-school programs. So what I have in mind is just a very small amendment that would, while we wait for the overall plan for fiscal '21, to provide a little bit of money for after-school programs at our highest poverty schools. So I plan to work with staff on that and with my colleagues on that, just to alert everyone to that. My questions are, one other comment, just on, it's a small point, but on page 5, with the equity plan for discipline policies and practices. I think really and truly, when you read into it, that's 7 positions for substance abuse prevention specialists. We might have wanted to highlight that because that, I think, is a more accurate description of what that funding is. For my question has to do with the staffing reserve, the $3.3 million adding there. That brings us up to 294 positions in the staffing reserve. Based on our projections from, or our trends, let's say, in the last, say, 5 years, is that going to be enough? I guess why I'm asking that question is, if we see another influx of students like we did, for example, 3 years ago, we don't want to be caught short like we were, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, where we ran out, and particularly at some of our schools where we have a greater influx of students in the late winter and early spring. Have you taken a look to see, have you done an assessment and projected where you think the added students might come from, and if in fact 294 positions in the staffing reserve is in fact going to be adequate?
Well, remember that currently we have 260 positions in the staffing reserve, and so this allocation would bring that up by 34 positions, because we too are concerned, because a large amount of the staffing reserve has already been apportioned based on enrollment and allocated to schools. So, we projected an enrollment decrease from fiscal 19 to fiscal 20 coming in September, but we don't have any better information at this point aside from our projections and then the information that the principals can give us. So as far as a potential influx in the next couple of months, we don't know about that yet. And so that's why we're asking for additional positions, so that we're basically going to err on the side of caution. And of course, if the positions aren't needed, then they wouldn't be used.
Well, thank you for erring on the side of caution. I think that's a preferable way of doing things. Thank you.
Ms. Palchuk, followed by Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions. Number one, following up on Ms. Evans' question, just to clarify for the staffing reserve, does that include, is that only teachers, or is that all kinds of, does it include counselors and other support positions?
It's primarily teachers and instructional assistants.
So do we have a process whereby we may have lost half a counselor position due to, 20 student reduction that we expect actually will change throughout the school year? Is there an ability, especially if we're looking to fund our mental health supports, to supply those as well for schools?
Yes, they can request from the staffing reserve, any kind of a position that is essentially a school-based position. But largely, it's teachers and instructional assistants that are approved unless there's some extenuating circumstance.
Okay, but a school can ask for any of those positions when their numbers change?
You can certainly request those. Again, we look at those requests and base any positions that we provide on those positions that we currently have in the reserve. But it's working with RAS, it's working with HR to basically fulfill the needs of the schools.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is, I guess more for Mr. Plattenberg. As I'm still waiting on some information, and some of this we may have to go back to, close based on safety and security. Just wanted to know, A, if you feel that at this point, we have been able to fund those major requirements and recommendations that were provided. And as you know, I've been having some conversations with Mr. Vaccarello and you about, the vestibules, schools that have them and that don't, and kind of what it would take, if recommended, to move forward with that kind of support.
Yeah, you raise a good question. I mean, the reality of it is this board funded positions to make sure that we were aggressive on our training, our annualized training. In fact, we've hired those positions. We're in preparation of making sure that we initiate that for next year. We've completed the lock implementation, all the lock exchanges that this board had also approved on time and really before, under budget and on time. So all of the initiatives that have been requested have been done. The vestibule aspect, this board, previous boards had funded some portion of money to get some schools done, but then the others were going to be done as a part of the phasing through renovation. That is kind of a lengthy, timely process. It is rather costly, and I believe we're pulling together some general estimates for your purview, for the governing body's review.
Okay, I appreciate it. So I'll continue to work with you and keep talking with the board about those initiatives. Thank you.
Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Super, and I'll try to be brief. Regarding the speech-language pathologists, I understand that they are being included in the flexible staffing reserve as a way of funding them. Just so that we make it clear to the community, it might be useful to actually put in there the specifics of how much we've allocated for our speech-language pathologists. Additionally, some of the items that are on the in this document, I fully support the Edison Labs and suggest that that's the benchmark that we should establish for all of our labs that are throughout the county. I know that we've spent a lot of money on labs at TJ, and we want to have access to opportunity for students throughout the county for superior labs. Additionally, I support the trades for tomorrow. However, I would like, as a follow-on to this, from staff, some specifics about how we complement the work that's being funded here through strategic relationships with businesses and our trade associations, or trade unions, that allow for real and meaningful work experiences for our students. Because I do know that we have a number of very generous supporters in the community, and by profiling what we're already doing, I think that that is a way of also encouraging other businesses and organizations to come to the table with opportunities for all of our students throughout the county.
Is that a next step?
That is a next step, please. And third, with the item Roman numeral 10, beginning balance, I think it would be helpful in a Brabrand brief. I don't think we need it today, but a Brabrand brief that would actually detail a bit more about what the department critical needs are for the carryover, as well as some of the school multi-year projects carryover, so that for transparency, this board knows what we're talking about here, as well as the encumbered obligations. Because my understanding of the encumbered obligations are that we give a certain percentage to each of our local principals that they are able to obligate but use in the as a going concern in the opening days of the school year. And so giving that contextualization on how this works would be helpful not only for board members but for the community.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett Sanders. Would anyone else like to speak before I do go-backs? All right, I have two go-backs, Ms. McLaughlin and Ms. Schultz.
So I wanted to demonstrate a little more clarity. So if you go to page 4, number B, commitments and carryover for $600 or for $60 million, correct? Yeah. So $60 million. Look at section B, commitments and carryover, and it lays out the three numbers. That's all the information we have for $60 million. Now you go to page 6, under number J, trades for tomorrow, $202,000, and we get that level of detail. So Dr. Brabrand, the reason why I'm bringing this up is, first of all, I've always felt you're very supportive of this board. So my bringing up the issue of whether or not the board needs to have more staffing positions to do its constituent work, I've never felt you've been a barrier to that. I know you would be fully supportive of what the board needs to do. In the 8 years I've been on the board, we went from having one executive assistant to serve 3 board members to now we have 2 serving, 2 school board members being served by 1 executive assistant. So we have half of a 1, it used to be a third of a 1. And then Ms. Schultz was making an editorial remark that they also still have other duties beyond just serving 2 elected officials. But why this matters and why I wanted to go back is because, Dr. Brabrand, what I wanted you to understand is we want to partner with you too on the budget. So understand how hard this is for us. We're feeling, many of us that I've talked to, we don't want to spend money on ourselves. We feel very guilty about that. And we've come through numerous recessions. But here we are with $60 million, and in particular, $6.5 million, and to have 6 additional assistants to help the school board members potentially do, be able to cover more constituent work, we're worried about $600,000 and whether or not that's reasonable to come forward on. And there's 6.5 million, I don't even know what that is. So I do want to say to my colleagues, this really isn't even actually to Dr. Brabrand, and it isn't to Ms. Burden. The 12 of us, by a county of 1.1 million people, elected us to make these decisions every year on a $3 billion budget. So it's only by the questions we're willing to ask and the decisions we're willing to make that it falls on our shoulders. So I guess my wrap-up is, Dr. Brabrand, it was very thoughtful of you to want to speak up, but none of this burden falls on your shoulders at all, or on Ms. Burden. It's really on the board to decide. But I appreciated that some people also noted every year in a $3 billion budget, you're gonna have a couple million shake out here or there. I mean, everybody's willing to discount that. Of course, that's reasonable, that makes sense. And yet, this board, in my 8 years on it, we have haggled over hundreds of thousands of dollars on how individually we might want to spend things. So the incongruity is what I'm asking people to think about. Regrettably, I'm not going to be here for the year-end budget vote on the 25th, so it will be incumbent upon my colleagues to decide if people want to do a school board office staff placeholder for $600,000. It's a placeholder. Nobody has to vote how to do it yet. But if we don't do this now, we are talking about technically 2 more school years before you might get funding to serve the voters in this county.
Ms. Burden, would you like to speak?
Yes, I did want to clarify that the reason that you have the, on page 4, the outstanding encumbered obligations at 27.2 million, which again are purchase orders or undelivered orders that are carried forward. That's a little higher than we see historically because there was a delay in shipment of Intel processors that we've been experiencing. About 50% of those encumbrances are all IT items. Another 20% is facilities, and the rest are the other departments. But we can provide you with a detailed list as part of next steps. The schools project carryover, again, multi-year projects, 25% per school board policy that the schools can carry forward as their year-end balance, and then the department critical needs carryover of 6.5 million. And the reason those are not detailed, similar to the Trades for Tomorrow, 200,000, is because they are routine and happen every single year. The other things are items that are just this year only, and so there's a far greater level of detail for those items than there are for these things that happen every year. Every organization carries over undelivered orders or items that are on POs that have not yet been delivered. The 25% is probably a little unusual. That's about 9 million of that. The multi-year projects, again, are items that we carry over because they're multi-year projects every year, and then the department carryover is based on their requests and projects that may not be multi-year, but they didn't get off the ground necessarily in the current year.
I appreciate that very much. I think the key word is carryover, so it will be helpful for the board just to understand what that carryover of unspent funds are, in case we might need to be looking at something as small as a $600,000 placeholder. Thank you, Ms. Burden.
All right, I have several board members who have added to the list, but we're going to keep in order, and we have Ms. Schultz, followed by Mr. Moon.
So I don't know if I'm struggling to get the same answer I think that Ms. McLaughlin was trying to get. I think that by the time you come to us with a year-end balance, this is not the point where I think the board should be asking in a next step for the additional detail. This is when the detail should be. At this conversation, like posted ahead of this, and now should be the detail. We should not be asking, okay, well, what fundamentally makes up an $80 million rollover, of which we're going to sock away $25 million for the successive year? These are basic questions that I think the board needs to understand. What was allocated and what was not spent? What is encumbered? How have we mitigated the concerns around sole source contracting, which previously the explanation to us about the unencumbered was not stuff that was residual in the schools as carryover, but these were sole source contracts that were encumbered. They were purchase orders that were already let, and we were waiting for orders to be delivered. What are these? What is it to the tune of whatever it is, I forget, $26 million. So I would like some commentary about that, because that's even come up so much so that it is becoming now a part of the audit plan. The next part, Mr. Plattenberg, the safety and security report had 60 some odd recommendations. We still haven't gotten the administrative facility side that was supposed to come with that was a part of the original forum topic. So I'm in the what other things are out there around the safety and security of the schools and administrative facilities could we be considering? And then what has happened to, it's been multi-years now where we were promised that our checkbook was going to be online, and we were just waiting for the county, and all we had to do was turnkey the system, and we still don't have that. And with my final 42 seconds, in our budget, we had $700,000 for Trades for Tomorrow. We have 40% of our trades personnel are eligible for retirement within 10 years. This is a great start, but it got knocked out at the budget, and we're talking about an $80 million rollover, but we couldn't fund, $700,000 to build CTE for all of the kids, that we want to grow our own, not only in the teaching force, but all the rest of the support personnel. And so this is where I agonize that we have $80 million sitting there, and yet, we wrung our hands over and threw Trades for Tomorrow under the bus at the time of the budget. So what could we do to increase that line item? So could I get some commentary on those?
Let me take the first crack on a couple, please, Ms. Burden. And then I included Trades for Tomorrow in the budget. The board made a decision to wait till the end. At the end, we really sat back at staff and said, what can we get done off the ground with the fidelity of implementation this board expects? I worked with you and Sloan last week to get $200,000 in for year end. I do think it's a win-win, because the idea that you brought out is something that really matches with our Teachers for Tomorrow. We need to start to build our own pipeline for operational instructional employees. Something I think you said actually earlier, we're giving you the format that we've done every year. I've been here 2 years. If you want a different format, partner with me and tell me what it is, and we'll get you the format. But in lieu of direction, I'm going with, I have staff instructed to go with what we've been doing year after year. If there's something in that you feel systematically is impacting you all as board members to do your work, I want to know it, and I'll make those changes. So I wanted to say that about that piece. I think that's all I want to say, and see if Ms. Burton has anything else to add.
Okay, well, I do want to say this, only because you've said it a couple of times now. The sole source contracts are a completely separate issue. There is no evidence that I have available to me that this carryover purchase orders, that any of them are sole source. And in fact, over the last year, we have reduced the number of sole source procurements by 7%. So we are working very hard to scrutinize those sorts of contracts. And I really no longer see a problem in that area based on the scrutiny that we're doing now and we're going to continue to do in the future. As far as the 27 million that are purchase orders, we can give you any level of detail, and we'll do so in the next steps on all of these categories. Again, like I said, about 50% of it, or 12 million, is for the Department of Information Technology. 6.5 million
Is
is
that
facilities
because
and
of
transportation.
FCPS on? Is that FCPS on?
Yes, some of that is FCPS on.
Okay, and what about our checkbook online and then the safety and security stuff?
It is my understanding that all of those transparency sort of items are online currently.
So if you simply type in transparency on the website, on the search, it will take you to all of our documents, and all of our documents are posted there. And at the bottom, there is a transparency application that shows all of our vendor payments. It shows our budget versus actual expenditures. You can search by vendor to see how much we're paying to each one of our vendors. And that system has been up for quite a few years now. But you can certainly go type in transparency, and we'll take you to all of our documents, and we'll provide a high level of transparency to the community about how we're spending our
That's not the equivalent of a
dollars.
checkbook online, is it? That's not like the VDOE checkbook online.
It's the FCPS version of the online checkbook. It has every transaction posted.
Maybe that's something, if you all can look at that and come back and give us feedback about it, we can.
And you can certainly, you type in a vendor, any vendor that we do business with, and we'll show you all of our our interactions and POs with those vendors and the expenditures that we've spent.
And regarding the safety and security, I know we have taken a look at a number of the facilities, even ones that we are leasing. I'm going to have to cycle back with an update on where we are. I know I'm working with Mr. Vaccarella and his team on exactly what that would incorporate and what we can get done now, both with minimal cost and also with the cost estimate.
And just one additional piece, the transparency application is broken out by fund. And so there's food and nutrition, all of our individual funds. And so if you want to know how much we spend on milk, you could certainly put that in there and you could see how much we're spending. It's all there in the transparency tool.
All right, thank you. I want to say something here as well, and then I have three more people who haven't spoken yet, so any of those three who don't get your questions done, you can go for a go back as well. But I think sometimes when you're the chair or the vice chair, you get close to the budget and you really understand it intuitively. So all these questions that you all have today are questions that I've had, but I've had the benefit, I think, sometimes sitting with staff directly and being able to probe them and ask for questions. So it is a complex budget. There are items there where I understand you may need additional details. So as Dr. Brabrand said, I think it's really important that we take maybe and group and gather these questions to make improvements to next year's process. I think that will be very, very important. And I do, Marty, I think you were integral in getting this done, and you guys are also being a bit modest because we are such a complex system, but you've also had awards for transparency in the budgeting process. And I think though sometimes you're all you know, working it and getting as much information as you can out to us, but sometimes you need to maybe remind us of what's out there, because I know those types of things, we have gotten national accolades for those, and I even, as you were saying that, I'm like, I forgot that that existed, and I sit here as the chair this year as the budget. So with that, we have Mr. Moon, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, and Ms. Strauss.
Yes, we are about 9 minutes behind the schedule. Okay, I'm just going to use my 2 minutes. Mrs. McLaughlin, that and the rest of the colleagues, one thing that I want to bring to my colleagues' attention is about whether the board wants to discuss whether there is a better way for us to be able to do our job as board members, especially for the next board. I think that's where Mrs. McLaughlin was making an advocacy to set aside a certain amount of funding. If that is, but this board, the current board, has not recently had, that discussion. There may be, who knows, this board, for the next board, they may decide to have that discussion between now and the end of the year, or wait until the next board comes on and then have the next board discuss how they want to do it. As far as amount of funding is concerned, we don't know what that will be like, whether it's a $600,000 for the 6 position will be the right amount. If it is 6 positions, probably for the half of the year. If it starts from January of next year, it's not going to be $600,000. Probably, closer to half of that. But I think it is premature for us to set aside the funding because we're not gonna. I don't think this board will decide to hire anyone between now and December to do it if we want any change to be done. So the best time might be for if this board decides to have that discussion sometime before many of us get to retire end of this year. But setting aside the funding wise is concerned. Is a mid-year budget review in December? Okay, December might be a better time to set aside the funding rather than this time. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Keys-Gamarra?
I'll just add to that discussion. While I understand setting aside the funds may be more ideal in December, I also know that oftentimes people are less available, and I'm concerned about having that discussion and being able to have quality discussions regarding that issue. I do support the issue of getting better support for school board members. Our community expects a great deal, and rightly so. I mean, we have a very educated electorate. They hold us to a very high standard. It's questionable whether we have the level of support that we need to actually meet that. And so I would encourage us to have those discussions, Dr. Brabrand, and have an idea of what that would mean so that we're not trying to hastily make some sort of or have a discussion. So I think that I'd like to hear from the superintendent with respect to how we might best approach Ms. McLaughlin's suggestion and go from there. But I know, having been on the board, kicking the can down the road sometimes just means that we've got a lot of road ahead of us. So I will, before I go on, he wanted to speak, and then I had 2 more things to say.
I would just say, I think the board would need to decide the appropriate place. Is it governance or somewhere else, or board leadership to work with me? And we can bring the number before December, right? The work could be happening the end of the summer, the beginning of the fall, and you can have an update about what that looks like well before you see that number appear in December. In fact, I'd recommend that work happens sooner. But it's really hearing from all of you among yourselves what you're looking for, what you envision for your work, and then embedding that into the budget for next year.
Sorry, yes, that's more what I'm thinking of, Dr. Brabrand. I don't think at this point today we're able to make a decision. We simply don't have the information. I know our colleagues are going to have extensive questions as to what this will mean, if there are any trade-offs or anything of that nature, and I'd like to be able to have fully researched that before we make a decision. It needs to be an informed decision. The other questions I have are, I'd like to ask Ms. Burden, what is the best practice governing our carryover funds? It seems like there's been some questions here regarding a variance that we've seen over the past few years. So could you help us understand if there is a best practice, or is it just a matter of, dealing with the facts as they come?
Well, it varies from division to division. in the sense that some divisions, Prince William and Arlington, have revenue sharing agreements, and so their carryover is 100%. That's dictated by their revenue sharing agreement, and then there's a true up of actual county revenue to see if they should have received more revenue, if the actual came in higher. The Virginia Code says that year-end funds convert back to the county. So some divisions in Virginia follow the letter of the law on that, and so all their purchase orders die on June 30th. And all of the funds that are unspent convert back to the local governing body. In Northern Virginia, though, right. In Northern Virginia, though.
You asked her, she's just telling you.
Right. In Northern Virginia, though, generally, the beginning, and some are a hybrid of that, like I know in Loudoun, they can carry purchase orders over, but any funds that are not allocated on a purchase order reverts back to the county as of June 30th. But all of the divisions around us have a carry forward of a beginning balance, and our beginning balance is less than 1% of our total budget. And, Loudoun's is 1.3, Prince William's is 1.3, the average is about 1.5 in the metropolitan area. And so I don't have any concerns about the amount that we're carrying forward, nor any of the carryover items that we've presented here today. If your local governing body allows you to carry those over, we're pretty comparable with what everybody's doing.
Thank you. I just want to go back to the previous subject with respect to Ms. McLaughlin's suggestion. I just want to say I have had some discussions with a few Board of Supervisors, and they actually support the school board members having more support and being able to have the level. Have the level of support that we need to serve the community. So I'll just throw that out there for the board's consideration.
All right, Ms. Strauss.
Okay, just a little bit of history. The Wavy Guide does outline the carryover percent from all of our surrounding jurisdictions, and we are low. And there have been other research done by various community groups in the last probably 20, 30 years, and they generally come out and say that our carryover should be larger, but it's not. And Mr. Moon, you can help me, at the height of the last recession, I think the largest carryover is about 65 million, because we simply did not know. And so while we were cutting, in the end, we cut over 2,000 positions and over $500 million. We were staying afloat because by code, we must be balanced at all times. So our carryover, as our revenues have been more stable, that carryover now is back to the low of about 1%, and it is low. Years and years ago, before we had technology, we would go home with a banker's box full of line-by-line budget documents that were line by line, school by school, area by area, department by department, and that was what we did. And we all read that all, and you take your little pen. And as we have been online, it is all still there. And you just have to know how to find it and where to find it. I would recommend that as the new board comes on, that there be a tutorial in how to find it, because it is there. The only caution is you then don't want to get back into the debate over how many paper towels are you going to order for next year. But it is all, some school divisions do that, and I think Ms. Burton can talk to that as she helps other boards get up to speed. But it is there, and it would be many boxes full, but I do think that people forget that it's there and aren't always aware of how to find it. The downside of getting it all out there, you do get down to, you can find out what everybody's paid in everybody's school, and that used to be kind of painful. But that level of detail is available to the public should they wish to see it. So it is all available. And when you have questions about the entire budget, that really needs to start that investigation needs to start in January. It's at this time of the year, unless you want to just go through and read the banker's box full now and ask those questions. So, thanks.
All right, and we have a couple more go-backs. We have Mr. Moon and then Ms. Schultz.
On the carryover, for those board members who went through Great Recession, that 25% school carryover, came out of a necessity of having to reduce. Why did it become 25%? Because it used to be larger, because we needed to take some money back. The central office needed money to be pulled out of a school. So we cut that to 25%. At the same time, we didn't want to completely eliminate that, because otherwise, if you have a rule of if you don't spend, we'll take everything back, then school would be just spending or wasting all the money. So that was a compromise, 25% was.
All right, Ms. Schultz.
So just two last things. On the going forward, the problem is I think that we always have next steps from previous work sessions, and they get answered, but they get answered and they get posted sort of in this nether area of our board docs. The problem is I don't think those get built in to a successive presentation, so that if it was a next step last time, that should be built in as a best practice going forward. Because if that was our question, and my question on the sole source, it goes back a couple of years, and the explanation for that line was, well, these are a lot of sole source contracts, or these are a lot of contracts where we've committed, and when we asked for those, for the detail on that, that never carried over to the successive years, year-end presentation. So if we had asked before, I think the practice of staff has to be, those next steps need to make the successive presentation better. So that's one. The second is on the transparency tool. I will tell you, I just typed in 3 different vendors. I can't find the vendors. I always thought that was the intermediary step when the transition with the system with the county failed, and that was our intermediary step to actually putting our checkbook online. When I go to the Commonwealth of Virginia, theirs is much better than ours. You have to know the exact name of the vendor in order to be able to type it, and you can only search by that particular vendor at that particular time. You can't search by program budget. You can't search any other way other than search by a vendor and that name. And that's the opposite of transparency. That's expecting, members of the public to know the name of the vendor that we're paying when that's what they're looking for. So what I'm looking for is there a plan to move us to the original thought of putting this online, which I think some of what we're trying to do here is actually push transparency out about how we're winding up our year-end budget, and when there's 80 million left over and we say, well, we'll just left 25 million off to the successive year, and we'll scrap at the table over $200,000 like it's, Coliseum death match, when maybe that's not completely necessary and we have some fungibility in those funds. So I would like some discussion. If it's not been thought of at all, then it's time to bring it back up. And then how do we get your other recommendations back to this table? Because that was a very comprehensive amount of effort that facilities took to go do that. And I will tell you, the safety and security of our buildings is one of the top things that I get from constituents all the time, and employees, not just parents. How do we when is the plan to bring those leftover recommendations back to the board and talk about, hey, last year at this time, this board authorized $4 million. But there's a whole lot of recommendations left that have not been done. How do we do that?
Just to follow up with the last point that you made is, we were intending on bringing items through our regular budget process that were part of safety and security recommendations. That would be the normal. It may not last the test of time because there were multiple millions of dollars of those safety and security recommendations. But our intention was, because we had identified and because the board had talked about in the work session which items they felt were funding appropriate at the time, I guess is the best way to say it, in addition to the additional counselors, our intent, our desire, and what I've said to my staff is, just because that is it, that is not the end, we will come forward. Staff's interpretation of the administrative was originally only of this building here. Mr. Smith has asked me to follow up with that. I have since asked my team to take a look at all of our administrative buildings as a result of some of the recent events. So you will be seeing those in our budget process. They may not make it through our initial phase, but certainly if the board wants us to bring those back again, we can do that. And I know Dr. Braybrand wants to mention something.
Just as a reminder, as we keep doing partnership, I would just say to board members, if it's something you raise prior to my arrival, I'm new, Marty's new in his position, Lee is new. I'm not familiar with online checkbook in my time here. I'm just being honest, I'm not familiar with it, haven't heard until today. I'll be glad to look into it, find out what's best practice, make a recommendation to you all. But some of those things where maybe you did bring it up in 3 or 4 years ago and you haven't seen it, please loop back and when we have our one-on-ones, and it's something I can go back and check on. So we have something and you think there's some pieces to it, it can be better. I strongly believe that transparency increases trust. And if we get our trust right in Fairfax County Public Schools with our community, we will have fully funded budgets as far as the eye can see. I believe that. I know maybe it's a little Pollyannish, but I believe that to be the case. And I want to be sure that I'm committed to that the narrative is transparency and trust, and it's not about trying to do anything other than that in the information that we're sharing with you now or at any time. So we'll follow up on the online checking. I'll learn more about it offline from you, Ms. Schultz.
All right, Ms. McLaughlin. You were done with 3 minutes. Was there an answer? What did you have? Is there something else?
Any movement on the online checkbook?
Oh,
Well,
I think Dr. Braybrand just answered that.
But that, other than what's existing, there was never a plan after?
I'm not aware of one. I'll have to check back. And again, since I've been here, today is the first day. I've never discussed it with Marty or Lee
Yeah, this is the first I'm hearing.
ever, but we can look into it.
One thing
and-
to remember about this is that our financial system is run by the county. So part of the prioritization of financial systems enhancements is a partnership with the school system and the county. We don't have direct control over that. So we can go back and talk to the county again about that, but that's not a system that we control.
Marty is actually about to have some upcoming operations meetings with the county. We just had our meeting with their deputy leadership, the county executive and their deputy leadership, senior leadership and ours. And that's something we can have Mr. Smith check on as well when we meet with them.
Regarding if it was a next step question in 1 year, we would be more than glad to do that. But at the same time, just to make sure I'm understanding, then there would be less next steps in the next time? So if we provided all of that detail from the get-go, then there wouldn't have to be a discussion or that. Okay, just check it.
I
just
blood
check it.
swear.
Just check.
Negotiations.
As long as you provide breadcrumbs on how to get there, that would be great. Ms. McLaughlin, I believe you will have the final word here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I wanted to go back. Dr. Braybrand, first of all, your words are extremely important, and I hope that not only the board, the leadership team, but the audience is hearing this. You're absolutely correct. With trust, which is built on transparency, we'll have a great partnership. I actually don't get the sense there's a lack of trust. I really feel that in your 2 years' time, and hate to break the news to you, but you are 2/3 of the way into Karen Garza's tenure, so you're not new anymore, and celebrate that. That's a good thing. You're not new anymore. You've been with us now, and I'm glad it feels like you're still new. It means you're not tired of us yet. So I'm going to take that also as a glow. But I think what's just helpful is even as my esteemed colleague from Drainsville and the Lee districts were both trying to say as budget chair and vice chair, you're correct. if people want to take hours, I mean, the public who've not had tutorials and do not know a $3 billion budget inside and out, they could dig and dig and dig and eventually find something. What I feel today's conversation hopefully has been is that things like a $60 million notation in the year-end budget with a $6.5 million line item, it's not unreasonable to just say, what is that? Just unpack it a little bit. And then you could even give a link that says, and if you really want to know more about this, here you go. But when we give the level of detail of a $200,000 line item, but no detail at all on a 6.5, it does cause the public to say, why didn't you want me to understand what that was, but you're allowing me to know what this is? And Ms. Burden, I really appreciate as someone who I know you work with such dedication to your work. My bringing this up is not to criticize the work you're doing. I'm just saying on a going forward basis, this is the kind of information that helps us as a board know where to look at monies, because we don't want to look in the wrong place. We don't want to draw from the wrong place. And then my final remark was to my esteemed at-large colleague and fellow Braddock resident, that I do support what Mr. Moon has said, that we could go ahead year-end, look at whether there's funds to address the school board staffing issue. However, I would just add an extra caveat to what Ms. Keys-Gamarra said, which is we begin the dialogue with each other, because it really is about what we, the 12 of us who have served for at least 4 years together, talk about what the needs are. But Dr. Brabrand, where it relates to you is, if this board were to determine that going into the next fiscal 21 budget with a brand new board who will just be trying to figure its way in doing this work, I want to position us that going into the FY21 budget, that if there's a decision to add positions, you're not caught at the January going, I don't know how to build that in.
No, that's correct. What I heard today was if the work starts soon, that we could have it at the mid-year for the remainder of this coming year, for January when the new board comes, that the supports would be in place at that time, and I would build into the FY21 budget for that ongoing. That's what I've heard so far today. We'll see if it's the next
Yes,
step.
thank you.
All right, I have one more go back, Ms. Hines.
Just quickly, in all this conversation, no one has mentioned the clerk and the clerk's office. And obviously, we need to coordinate anything that we plan for the school board with, because I remember the last time we talked about this, there were questions not only of money for positions, but what about space? And who's going to manage all those new employees? And does the clerk need another assistant clerk? So we have to have a plan before we just lay out some money, I think.
Absolutely, and following on that, I do remember there was quite extensive conversation, and when we said we went from, 3 people to 1 to 2 to 1, there were some who were advocating at that time to do one-on-one. There were some that didn't, and that's the vote that ended up. It ended up, I guess, a compromise vote for that. But there were other things there that, we were, we felt like there was a little bit of relief, but I do see, and I'm, all of us on this board who've served for 8 years or longer have seen the definite increase in volume and expectations, I guess that's what it is, yes, and complexity. All those things combined have made it very different from the beginning of my tenure here 8 years ago. So colleagues, thank you. This will be on the, I hear, we have some next steps. Do we have next steps, Any? I think we have some. And so this will be on the 25th of July for our approval. And I only recall hearing Ms. Evans saying there may be something, and but here we go. So Ms. McLaughlin, the first one is yours.
Yeah, I just want to shorten that and just say provide more detail on the 6.5. Yeah, I think it was called critical needs, 6.5 department critical needs carryover, yeah. As well as, Ms. Burden, within reason, if there can just be anything that explains the other 55 million that was in the other, it was a $60 million line item. So if it's As-
I understood the nature of your request. We understand.
Yeah, I
So-
mean, we just provide more
So
detail
number
on all
one,
those.
it needs to be saying more detail on the 60 million.
So if you look at item 5 on on the follow-on, those go hand in hand, and what I had suggested is that Dr. Brabrand provided to us in a Brabrand brief so that we can be informed about it.
It's A1 through 5, I think is what we're talking about. Total expenditures, A1 through 5.
10A1 through 5.
I'm going to make it less complicated and just say, Scott, give us on the 60 million and the 6.5, which is in that section. Yeah.
All right, number 2.
No, if just, yeah, I'm just going to start number 2 over. Provide,
Wait 1 second, there's side conversations. Who's taking,
Just put them next to each other, and they provide clarification to the two.
make 5 number 2,
Yeah.
and now we're, okay. So 1 second, Elizabeth, you can think about what you want to say.
Fine, all in one.
Is that good with you, Karen?
That's fine with me. We're the same objective.
All right, so we're on number 3 now, Ms. Schultz.
right, provide a breakdown of sub-items 4 through 8 under beginning balance, including identification of which items remain as sole source contracts. And if it's none, that's great, but, so the 4 through 8 are the outstanding unencumbered obligations, the school year multi-projects, you don't have to write this down, department critical needs, carryover, prior committed priorities, and strategic investments. Yes.
All right. Number 4, you're here still? I didn't know who walked away. 4.
This is to pull out of the staffing reserve the specific language or specific allocation for the speech language pathologist. Itemize it would be fine. That's fine. That makes more sense. That would just say itemize amounts for speech language pathologists.
Then your next one?
And the next one is, I think we make a mistake by we're looking at the trades for tomorrow in isolation, and we really need to look at it as a holistic, what are we doing in creating trade opportunities for our students in the trades to get work experience. So that's why that's there, and yes, that's fine. How do you hope to get the answer? Well, Dr. Presidio, you have much of that, correct? Because we've been working quite a bit on just these issues for over a year.
So would this be in a Brabrand briefing then?
That would be
From
fine,
Dr.
yeah.
Presidio? Okay, just wondering.
I just said that it's the
Then
whole
can you just add
issue.
provide and BB, just as a mental tickle?
Sure.
I'm sorry, I have one, I didn't get to ask the question, but I do have a question because I think it goes to a lot of what we're talking about. There, under the summer school sub-fund, it says that we have a bigger balance because we spent less. I would like some kind of a next step explanation of why we spent less, because I don't want us to necessarily spend less, especially when there's higher needs, so.
All right. And Elizabeth, did you check number 6? What? Got it. Okay. Thank you all. We will take a 5-minute break. We are 2 hours behind once we do that. So let's just be quick with our break and convene back here in 5 minutes.